Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when silence no longer protects you. You feel it, a tightening in your chest when you want to say no, but you whisper yes instead. A sinking in your gut when you swallow your truth because you're afraid it might be too much for someone else to hear. But here's what no one tells you. Every time you suppress your voice to make others comfortable, a piece of you disappears. And one day, if you stay quiet long enough, you won't recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. Why must you watch this through to the end? Because the version of you that dares to speak, the one that isn't afraid to take up space, is waiting to be born. And if you truly wish to find freedom, confidence, and peace, you must learn to honor your voice. Silence is not always strength. Sometimes it's submission. We are taught from a young age to hold our tongue, to avoid conflict, to be agreeable even when our soul disagrees. We're told that being silent is noble, that it's mature, that it's peaceful. And yes, there is a kind of silence that comes from wisdom, a calm stillness that sees through chaos and chooses tranquility. But there is another kind of silence, one that festers, a silence born not of clarity, but of fear. The silence that doesn't protect you, but erodes you. The silence that you adopt, not because you're strong, but because you feel small. Our body felt it first. A tensing of the shoulders, a heat in the chest, a clenching of the jaw. It was the body trying to say what the mouth would not, and yet we said nothing. We let the moment pass, hoping silence would keep the peace. But inside, we weren't at peace at all. Why do we do this? Because somewhere along the way, we confused silence with safety. We believed that if we just stayed quiet, we'd be accepted. We'd avoid conflict, we'd be liked. But here's the truth. A peace that costs you your voice is not peace. It's fear in disguise. And no amount of approval from the outside world can heal the ache of abandoning your truth. People often say, pick your battles, and yes, not every situation demands a loud response. But speaking up isn't always about battling others. Sometimes it's about battling the part of you that thinks you're not worth being heard. It's about breaking the agreement you unconsciously made to stay small so others feel comfortable. Speaking up for yourself doesn't mean being aggressive, rude, or confrontational. It simply means being honest. It means allowing your words to reflect your soul instead of hiding behind polite masks and forced smiles. It means trusting that what you feel, what you need, and what you believe matter enough to be expressed. There is a strange illusion that silence makes you strong, that if you don't complain, don't argue, don't speak, you're somehow more composed. But true strength isn't measured by how well you suppress yourself. It's measured by how truthfully you can live. And truth requires expression. Look at the way nature works. Rivers do not stay quiet. The wind does not whisper to avoid offense. Fire does not dim to keep others warm. Nature exists in its full expression, unapologetic and alive. You too are a part of that natural world. You were not made to silence yourself into invisibility. When you don't speak up, life starts to shape itself around your silence. You'll find yourself in relationships where you're not seen, in careers where you're not valued, in situations where you're constantly negotiating your worth without ever saying a word. And then one day you wake up wondering why you feel so disconnected from yourself. The answer? You handed your power over every time you stayed silent when your spirit wanted to speak. Let go of the fear that your truth is too much. Let go of the belief that your voice is a burden. You were given a voice for a reason, not just to communicate, but to liberate, to carve out space in this world where your spirit doesn't have to shrink to fit in. Speaking up is not easy, especially if you've spent years conditioned to believe that silence is safer. But each time you choose to speak, even if your voice trembles, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You teach the world how to treat you, not through demands, but through the quiet power of self-respect. And in that moment, when you finally let your truth rise from your chest and flow from your lips, you will realize this is not rebellion, this is not defiance. This is what freedom feels like. So no, silence is not always strength. Sometimes it's just fear with a mask on. And the only way to unmask that fear is to speak, not to win an argument, not to prove a point, but simply to honor the truth living inside you. Your voice is not noise. It's your presence manifesting in the world. There's a deep misunderstanding many of us carry, often without realizing it. We mistake our voice for disruption, our opinions for inconvenience, and our feelings for burdens. Somewhere along the way, we were made to believe that speaking up was impolite, that asking for what we need was selfish, and that expressing our truth was an act of arrogance. And so, little by little, we shrink. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. We start editing ourselves before we even speak, filtering our thoughts to fit in, to please, to avoid rocking the boat. And yet, despite all this effort to be agreeable, we still feel invisible. But your voice was never meant to be buried. It was meant to be a bridge between your inner world and the outer one, a channel through which your presence flows into the lives of others. When you speak, you do not simply make sound. You declare, I exist, I feel, I matter. Your voice is the shape your spirit takes in the air. And to silence it is not humility, it is self-erasure. Think of how unique your voice truly is. It carries your story, your truth, your journey. No one else has lived your exact life. No one else has felt what you felt, learned what you've learned, but carried your pain with such quiet strength. So why would you believe that expressing that journey makes you unworthy or too much? The world is not hungry for more noise. It is hungry for authenticity. It longs for people who can speak not from ego, but from essence. People who don't talk to dominate, but to reveal. When you speak with sincerity, you're not adding to the noise, you're cutting through it. You're reminding others that there's still honesty left in this world, still depth, still someone who dares to be real. But most people don't know this. They confuse being vocal with being vain. They think that staying quiet means being strong, being liked, being accepted. But what good is acceptance if it requires you to hide? What comfort is there in being loved for a version of you that isn't even true? Your voice is not a performance. It is a presence. It's how the unseen parts of you come into the light. Without it, even the most powerful thoughts and the most important truths remain locked inside, unheard and unshared. So many people are walking around carrying unspoken grief, unvoiced wisdom, and unlived potential. Not because they don't have something valuable to say, but because they've been told they shouldn't say it. And that is a tragedy, because the world is built on shared experience, on words that wake us up, that pull us in, that teach us what it means to be human. Your voice can be one of those. It doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be yours. When you speak up for yourself, you don't just claim space. You give permission to others to do the same. You break the illusion that silence is safety and remind people that presence is power. That real power doesn't come from being the loudest in the room, but from being the most aligned with your truth. If you've ever felt like your voice doesn't matter, like no one's listening, or like it's safer to stay quiet, understand this. The world may not always applaud you for speaking, but that's not the point. The point is that you hear yourself, that you stop waiting for someone else to validate your existence, that you learn to stand in your own truth, even if your legs shake as you do it. Your voice is not noise. It is evidence that you are here, awake, alive. It is the proof that your soul didn't come to this world to be hidden behind polite silence. You came to feel, to express, to connect. And your voice is the instrument through which that happens. Not to be loud, not to impress, not to convince, but to be present. Because in a world full of echoes and performance, a genuine voice is not noise. It's a rare kind of music. Speaking up is not arrogance, but the purest form of self-respect. Many people walk through life believing that expressing their needs, setting boundaries, or asserting their opinions is somehow selfish or egotistical. They've been told, directly or indirectly, that being too forward is rude, that asking for what you want makes you demanding, and that standing up for yourself is a form of arrogance. So they begin to equate silence with humility. They wear self-erasure as a badge of honor, believing that by minimizing themselves they are being kind. But kindness without self-respect is not kindness. It's self-abandonment. And over time, this quiet abandonment turns into resentment, confusion, and even shame. You begin to wonder why people don't treat you with respect. But how can they, when you never modeled it for them? You taught them that your boundaries were optional, that your needs were negotiable, that your presence was secondary. Not because you said so, but because you didn't. Speaking up is not about thinking you are better than others. It's about remembering that you are not less. To speak is to recognize your worth. It's an act of saying, I know who I am, and I will not disappear just to make you comfortable. It's not about overpowering others or forcing your will. It's about standing in your truth with clarity, with grace, and with dignity. It is not about winning an argument. It's about refusing to argue with your own soul. There is a false belief that silence is always virtuous, that a person who swallows their truth is more mature, more composed, more spiritually evolved. But maturity is not measured by how much you can suppress. True maturity is the ability to speak honestly without losing yourself or hurting others in the process. That's real balance, real power, to express yourself clearly, calmly, and courageously. You see, the act of speaking up is not about proving anything to anyone. It's not even about being heard, always. It's about honoring the relationship you have with yourself. It's a signal to your own heart that you are willing to protect it, that you will not allow it to be mistreated, overlooked, or manipulated in silence. Because every time you choose to stay quiet in the face of disrespect, you teach yourself that your comfort doesn't matter. You whisper to yourself that peace is more important than your pain. But peace at the expense of your self-worth is not peace at all. It's paralysis. To speak up is to break that paralysis. It is to awaken a deeper sense of alignment within you. It is to remember that you are not here to be agreeable, you are here to be authentic. And authenticity requires courage. It requires the bravery to speak, even when your voice trembles, even when you fear judgment, rejection, or discomfort. It's easy to stay silent and pretend it's strength. It's easy to walk away and call it wisdom. But real wisdom is knowing when to walk away and when to speak. It's knowing that your silence should be a choice, not a habit rooted in fear. You were not created to be passive. You were not born to fold every time someone challenges your truth. You were not placed in this world to apologize for your existence. And the moment you begin to internalize that, something changes. You no longer see speaking up as a threat to connection, because the people who truly value you will not be threatened by your voice. They will be clarified by it. They will rise to meet your honesty, not retreat from it. And those who shrink away from your truth were never really present to begin with. Speaking up is not arrogance. Arrogance is rooted in insecurity. It shouts to silence others. But self-respect speaks quietly and firmly, not to overpower, but to stand tall. It doesn't need to explain itself. It simply is. So the next time you feel the urge to speak but hesitate, ask yourself, what would self-respect do here? Would it shrink? Would it hide? Or would it step forward and say, this is who I am, and this is what I will accept? The world doesn't need more people who are afraid of being too much. It needs more people who are willing to be fully themselves without apology, because in a life that asks you to stay silent, the most radical act of self-love is to speak. Fear of rejection is the prison that holds your truth hostage. It's not the lack of words that silences people, it's fear. A deep, almost invisible fear that if we speak up, something will be taken from us: love, belonging, safety. We fear that if we truly express ourselves, we'll be misunderstood, laughed at, dismissed, or worse, abandoned. This fear runs so deep that it shapes the way we show up in every space. It teaches us to filter our words, to measure our tone, to second-guess our instincts. We begin to rehearse silence as a survival mechanism, until one day it becomes our nature. But what we don't realize is that in our attempt to avoid rejection, we begin to reject ourselves. We choose external harmony over internal truth. We choose to be accepted by others at the cost of being known by ourselves. And so we live behind masks, polite, agreeable, quiet, and convince ourselves that this is what it means to be strong. But in truth, it's not strength that keeps us silent. It's fear. Imagine having something beautiful, something honest, something that could transform your life, but locking it away because you're terrified someone won't approve. That's what happens when you don't speak your truth. You hold yourself hostage to the idea that someone else's opinion of you is more important than your own authenticity. Fear of rejection is powerful because it isn't just about one person saying no to you. It triggers something deeper. The ancient human need to belong, to be accepted by the tribe. Being rejected used to mean exile, even death. And even though times have changed, the nervous system remembers. We hesitate. We stay quiet in rooms where our truth wants to speak. We dim ourselves so others don't feel uncomfortable. We avoid confrontation, not because we agree, but because we're afraid of being left alone. But here's the paradox. The more you fear rejection and act from that fear, the more disconnected you become. From others, yes, but most dangerously from yourself. You begin to lose the sound of your own inner voice. You forget how it feels to say what you mean. You become so accustomed to filtering your truth that you no longer know what it even is. Rejection hurts, that's undeniable. But what hurts more? Momentary rejection from others or the lifelong rejection of your own soul? You see, the ones who reject you when you're being real are not rejecting you. They're rejecting their idea of you. And if your authenticity makes them uncomfortable, that's not your burden to carry. Your job is not to be digestible to everyone. Your job is to be real, because truth may not please the crowd, but it will free you. When you stop fearing rejection, you start living in alignment. You begin to say what you mean, to ask for what you need, to walk away from what no longer serves you. You stop begging for love and start embodying it. And what you find is that the people who matter, the people who are meant for you, they don't run from your truth. They meet it, they listen, they stay. But you'll never discover that if you keep silencing yourself out of fear. You'll stay stuck in a loop, constantly adjusting, constantly shrinking, constantly wondering why you feel unseen, unfulfilled, unworthy. The next time fear grips your throat and tells you to stay quiet, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? And is the price of being accepted worth the cost of being unknown. You were not born to be invisible. You were not made to tiptoe through life, trying not to offend, trying not to lose anyone, trying not to be left behind. You were born to be whole, and wholeness requires honesty. Let rejection come if it must. Let people leave if they must. Every time you choose your truth over their approval, you take a brick out of the prison wall. Every time you speak with courage, even if your voice shakes, you walk one step closer to liberation. Your truth is not dangerous. Your voice is not a threat. What's truly threatening is a life unlived because of the fear of what someone else might think. So speak, not because it guarantees approval, but because it honors the most sacred thing you have, yourself. When you withhold your voice, you agree to invisibility. Most people don't realize the deal they're making when they stay quiet. It seems harmless in the moment, a simple decision to avoid conflict, to go along with what others say, to let something slide. But each time you choose silence over truth, you slowly begin to disappear. Not physically, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually. You become less seen, less heard, and eventually less connected to who you are. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow fade. One moment of silence becomes two. One instance of going along with something you don't believe becomes a pattern. You nod when you disagree, laugh when you're uncomfortable, and smile when something hurts. The people around you think everything's fine. How could they know otherwise? You've trained them to believe that your silence means consent. And so, you begin to vanish. To be visible is not just about being looked at. It's about being known, understood, felt. It's about showing up with your full self, not just the curated version that keeps others comfortable. But when you withhold your voice, you send a message to the world that your presence is optional. You tell people, what I feel isn't important, and in doing so you allow them to treat you as though you don't exist. You may not mean to do this. You may believe you're simply being polite, keeping the peace, or avoiding drama. But peace that demands your silence is not peace at all. It's performance. And over time, that performance becomes exhausting. You begin to feel isolated, misunderstood, invisible, like you're surrounded by people, but no one really sees you. Because how can they? You've made yourself invisible. Invisibility is not a natural state. It's something we learn, often from a young age. Maybe you were told to be quiet, to not talk back, to be a good child. Maybe you learned that expressing yourself led to punishment, ridicule, or rejection, and so you stopped speaking up. You adapted, you survived, but survival is not the same as living. And what kept you safe then is now keeping you small. Withholding your voice is not humility, it's erasure. It's the gradual unmaking of your identity. You begin to forget what your own truth sounds like. You second-guess your thoughts, hesitate before speaking, and eventually you stop trying altogether. The tragedy is not that others don't hear you. The real tragedy is that you stop hearing yourself. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You can choose visibility. You can choose to show up, not with aggression or defensiveness, but with quiet conviction. You can choose to say what you feel, even if your voice shakes. You can choose to let people see the real you, not just the agreeable version that keeps the peace. And yes, that comes with risk. People might not like what you say. They might push back or walk away. But better to be disliked for who you are than to be invisible for who you're not. There is power in being seen, in being known, in standing in a room and knowing that you didn't edit yourself just to belong. When you speak your truth, even in small ways, you reclaim a part of yourself. You rebuild the connection to your own soul. You teach yourself that your presence matters, that your voice matters, that you matter. The world cannot respond to what you hide. You can only meet what you offer. And when you offer your voice, you invite others to truly connect with you, not just with your image, but with your essence. So stop agreeing to invisibility. Stop fading into the background of your own life. Use your voice, not to shout, not to argue, but to exist. Because when you withhold your voice, you're not just avoiding discomfort, you're disappearing. And the world doesn't need another perfectly polite, quietly suffering ghost. It needs you, fully visible, fully expressed, fully alive. You don't disturb peace by asserting yourself, you define it. There is a deeply rooted belief in many of us that speaking up, expressing disagreement, or setting boundaries is somehow an act of aggression. We associate calmness with silence, and silence with peace. So when we feel the urge to say no, to correct a misunderstanding, or to share a truth that might upset someone, we hesitate. We fear that by asserting ourselves we will ruin the harmony, shake the balance, or push people away. But what we often fail to see is that true peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of authenticity. Real peace doesn't demand your silence. It requires your truth. It's not fragile. It doesn't shatter when someone says how they really feel. If a peace is so delicate that it breaks when you speak your mind, then it was never peace to begin with. It was just the illusion of harmony built on unspoken resentment. You do not disrupt peace by asserting yourself. You reveal where peace was never truly present. Peace that costs you your voice is not peace. It is quiet control. And many people live in environments, relationships, families, workplaces, where that control is mistaken for love, respect, or order. But beneath the surface, there's emotional suppression, there's unacknowledged pain. And sooner or later, the truth demands to be heard. The longer it's suppressed, the louder it becomes. Silence doesn't make it go away. It just delays the inevitable explosion. When you assert yourself, you bring clarity. You say, this is where I end and you begin. You draw lines not to divide, but to protect connection from becoming exploitation. You create space for honest interaction, not performance. That is the soil in which real peace can grow. Peace that is alive, resilient, and rooted in truth. Most people aren't used to this kind of peace. They're used to walking on eggshells, pretending, adjusting themselves endlessly just to keep things calm. But calm on the surface, with chaos underneath, is not calm. It's stagnation. It's decay. When you speak your truth with kindness, when you state your boundaries with clarity, you're not creating conflict, you're preventing it. You're keeping things clean. You're removing the silent resentment before it becomes loud regret. It's important to understand that asserting yourself is not about being forceful. It's not about shouting or dominating. It's about owning your truth and expressing it without apology. It's the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to inflate or hide it. You define peace by showing what respect looks like. You define peace by demonstrating what you will and will not accept. You define peace by making it clear that your silence is not automatic, that it is earned, not assumed. Many people will mistake your clarity for aggression, simply because they benefited from your silence. Don't let that confuse you. Don't let their discomfort become your guilt. People who expect you to stay quiet so they can stay comfortable are not at peace. They're in control. There's a difference. You were not made to keep everything inside. You were not born to be agreeable at all costs. Your presence is not a disruption. It's a signal. A reminder that real connection begins when people stop pretending and start being honest. So speak your truth. Assert yourself. Not to overpower, but to align. Not to disturb, but to define. Because the peace you build on truth will always be stronger than the quiet you maintain through fear. And when you begin to live this way, when you stop apologizing for needing space, for disagreeing, for standing firm, you'll find something unexpected. Those who are meant for you will not just respect your boundaries, they will welcome them. They will feel safe in your presence because they know exactly where you stand. You don't disturb peace by asserting yourself, you clarify it. You anchor it. You invite others into a space where honesty lives, where dignity is mutual, and where connection is built not on pretense, but on presence. The world does not respond to silence. It responds to clarity. Many people confuse silence with strength. They believe that by saying less, by withholding opinions, by avoiding confrontation, they are exercising wisdom. But more often than not, silence is mistaken for agreement. People do not read your silence as depth. They read it as consent, as passivity, as a signal that you have nothing to say, or that you're willing to accept whatever is given to you. But inside, you may be screaming. You may be full of thoughts, convictions, and questions, all trapped behind a quiet face. And yet, none of that matters if it is never expressed. The world doesn't move on good intent, it moves on clarity. People cannot respect what you do not declare. They cannot honor boundaries you never define. They cannot hear needs you don't speak. And they cannot support dreams you never share. You may think they should know, or I've hinted, but the truth is most people aren't trained to read between the lines. They respond to directness, to truth spoken clearly and firmly, not as an attack, but as a statement of being. When you are unclear with your voice, the world becomes unclear in its response to you. You get back confusion, because confusion is what you put out. You accept less than you deserve because you never said what you needed. And slowly you begin to believe that your life is out of your control, when really it's your silence that has handed over the wheel. We fear clarity because we think it will make people uncomfortable. We fear hurting feelings, disappointing others, or coming across as demanding. But the deeper fear is that once we speak clearly, we can no longer hide. We become visible, responsible, accountable. There's no more pretending that we're okay with things we're not. No more comfort in the fog. But visibility is where freedom begins. Clarity is the foundation of a life built on truth instead of guessing. When you say exactly what you mean, when you speak with openness and courage, you create a life where the right people can find you, the right opportunities can meet you, and the right energy can support you. Clarity filters out what's not meant for you. It repels confusion, manipulation, and assumption. It creates alignment, not conflict. The irony is many people avoid being clear to avoid problems, when in reality a lack of clarity creates more problems. Misunderstandings, broken expectations, resentment, and emotional distance often stem not from what was said, but from what was never said. Silence builds walls that only clarity can tear down. You deserve to be understood, not just by others, but by yourself. And understanding begins with articulation. Speak your values. Speak your pain. Speak your joy. Speak your limits. Speak your goals. Speak your truth, not for applause, not to be loud, but because you deserve a life where your voice is not only heard, but honored. You don't have to say much to be clear. Clarity isn't about quantity. It's about honesty. A few simple words spoken from truth can change the entire direction of a conversation, a relationship, or even your life. No, I'm not okay with that. Yes, that matters to me. This is what I need. These statements might feel uncomfortable, but they are also profoundly liberating. When you live in clarity, you stop hoping others will guess who you are. You stop waiting to be chosen by accident. You become a conscious participant in your life, shaping your path with every word you dare to say aloud. The world does not respond to silence. Silence is a void, a mystery, a blank space others fill with their own assumptions. But clarity, that cuts through the noise. It calls forth truth. It invites reciprocity. It honors both you and those around you, because when people know where you stand, they know how to meet you. And those who cannot meet you there, let them walk. They were only there for the fog. So, speak clearly, not to control the world, but to participate in it. Speak not to dominate, but to align. Because a voice that dares to be clear becomes a life that dares to be free. Speaking up isn't about fighting. It's about remembering who you are. There's a common misconception that using your voice means entering into conflict, defending yourself constantly, or engaging in a battle of egos. Because of this, many people stay silent, not because they don't have anything to say, but because they've been conditioned to associate expression with confrontation. They think that if they speak up, they'll be seen as difficult, combative, or dramatic. But speaking your truth is not about conflict. It's not about winning arguments or proving points. It's not even about getting others to agree with you. It's much simpler and much deeper than that. Speaking up is a process of returning to yourself. It's an act of self-recognition. Every time you suppress your voice to keep others comfortable, a little part of you forgets who you are. It begins subtly. You tell yourself it's just one moment, one conversation, one disagreement, not worth the energy. But these moments stack. And eventually your silence becomes habitual. You begin to live by what's acceptable rather than what's authentic. You begin to shape your identity not by who you truly are, but by who the world allows you to be. Over time, this erodes your connection to self. You start to forget what your natural reactions are, what your core values feel like, what your inner voice actually sounds like. You find yourself second-guessing your instincts, tiptoeing around others, doubting your place. But deep down, the truth hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there, waiting to be spoken, waiting to be honored. And that's what speaking up does. It wakes you back up to your essence. It says, I still remember. I still matter. Speaking up is not resistance, it's remembrance. It's saying, this is me. This is what I feel. This is what I stand for. You're not trying to overpower anyone. You're simply stepping into alignment with your truth. And when you do that, you reclaim not just your voice, but your identity. It takes courage, especially if you've been silent for a long time. Especially if you were raised in environments where speaking up was punished or dismissed. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to speak in spite of it. Your voice doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It just has to be yours. Honest, unfiltered, present. There's a quiet strength in someone who knows they don't have to fight to be heard. They just speak. Not with the intent to overpower, but with the intent to be real. When you approach life this way, something shifts. You stop reacting to every opinion around you. You stop trying to manage other people's emotions or perceptions. Instead, you focus on staying rooted in yourself. You don't yell to be noticed. You don't argue to feel valid. You speak when your soul calls you to speak. And in that moment you remember. I am not lost. I am not small. I am not invisible. You don't have to shout. You don't have to debate. You don't even have to explain everything. You simply have to show up as you are and let your voice reflect that. You're not speaking to convince others. You're speaking to stay connected to yourself. And in a world that constantly tries to mold you into someone quieter, smaller, easier to manage, your voice becomes an anchor. It holds you steady. It reminds you of your center. Even when everything else feels uncertain, your voice says, I am still here. I still know who I am. You are not here to be agreeable at all costs. You are not here to water yourself down so others can swallow you more easily. You are here to be whole. And wholeness requires honesty. So speak up. Not because it's a battle to win, but because it's a truth to remember. Speak up to realign, to reconnect, to remind yourself that your voice is a part of your humanity. You are not a background character in your own life. You are the author. And every time you speak your truth, you're writing a story that is more real, more present, more you. Speaking up isn't about fighting, it's about remembering. And in that remembering, you return to the most powerful place you can ever be, yourself. Never be afraid to speak up for yourself. So after all the silence you carried, all the moments you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, to be liked, to avoid rejection, ask yourself, has that silence ever brought you closer to yourself? This world doesn't need more people who stay quiet just to survive. It needs people who are alive enough to speak. Your voice is not a disruption, it is not a threat. It is the living pulse of your truth, your presence, your power. And when you begin to speak, not to shout, not to impress, but simply to exist fully, you will realize something powerful. You were never too much. You were just waiting for permission, and now you no longer need it. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to draw lines, ask for more, and say what you truly feel. Because when you speak up, you don't just change conversations, you change your life. So speak, and keep speaking, because your silence was never your strength, your truth is.